Welcome to Cross-Examining Cyber, a podcast brought to you by Herbert Smith Freehills Kramer. In this podcast series, we speak to our business leaders about all things cyber, including the legal, governance, technical, regulatory and policy developments that impact corporates around the world. We also look at the evolving cyber risk landscape by speaking to those people who are on the front line. I'm really excited to announce that this is the first of our Cross-Examining Cyber Director Series. For the next 6 months, we will speak to some of our leading directors, including David Gonski, Templeman-Jones, John Mullen, Brenner, just to name a few. Today is the first in our series, and today we cross-examine David Moffatt. David has over 40 years' experience in executive leadership positions. He's worked and lived almost everywhere: Australia, the US, Europe and Asia. He's currently the chair of Ventia Services Group, Environmental Remediation and Social Services, and Apollo Global Management. David is also the chair of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Australia. David has first-hand experience dealing with a cyber incident as part of his role at Ventia. His insights are not only considered, but come from direct experience. Thanks again for listening. This is Cross-Examining David Moffatt, the first in our Director Series. Here we go. Welcome, David. Welcome to Cross-Examining Cyber. Where does this podcast find you today?
Well, it finds me in Herbert Smith Freehills Kramer's offices here in Melbourne.
David, what we'd like to do in these podcasts is find out a little bit more about you. You've got a really interesting background, one which transcends a number of different industries. Can you give us the 5-minute breakdown of the career and life of times of David Moffatt?
Well, hopefully in less than 5 minutes, Cam. So it's a random walk, quite frankly, of life. I started as, on a sheep property, Finewell Merino sheep in northern New South Wales. And then thanks to a great education, largely in Brisbane, I began a corporate career that had finance as its core theme throughout the entire, career. And that had me moving quite frequently. And so I've lived and worked in the US, in two major cities there. I've lived and worked in Europe and multiple geographies there, and in Australia and up in Hong Kong. Okay. And so that broad breadth of living and working in different geographies in a whole variety of businesses, from technology to manufacturing to operations and management around critical infrastructure, has led me to be very curious about the world, and also to have maybe a broader perspective than would be average in a career journey. But my background is working for other great companies: Citigroup in the financial services sector, GE, a defence contractor and a major manufacturer, a globally significant capital organisation, and AmCham now, a globally significant trade and defence and national security organisation, and then more recently at Ventia. So these perspectives come from working for good companies that have been the best in their game at the time when I was fortunate to work there. And then there was my period at Telstra, which was a fabulous company in terms of learning and understanding about best practice, and particularly best practice technology at the time, as we rolled out the 850, the NextG network. So Telstra was a very formative experience in my leadership journey for many, many reasons, but not least of which was the technological forward thinking, and how to position a company to be future ready.
Just before we talk about cyber specifically, I'd be interested in your view of, you've now moved into the space where you're an advisor or a board member of different organisations. You've got the privilege of seeing lots of different industries with a governance role, if you like. Just in terms of what makes a good director, before we talk about a good director in a cyber context, what in your mind are the key attributes of a good director, and perhaps a good board?
Yes, well, they're very important topics, and they matter immensely when you get into a crisis, and you soon find out whether these principles work. But in the first instance, a good director must deeply understand the industry that they have been honoured to be invited by the shareholders to represent. they should not take on the role if they don't deeply understand the industry. And when it comes to board, so individual directors need to bring their best selves, of course, but when it comes to board, it is about how the board effectively works together. The skills matrix really matters. And you also have to evolve your skills matrix for the changing circumstances. For example, at Ventia, we've evolved ours to take into account that we had not enough digital skills for the transformation of our digital platforms to a digital future, and we needed to add some additional skills. We had some skills, we needed more. So I think it's a case of it's like clay. It's moving, it's evolving, and it's shaping, and that's the role of the chair, is to bring together the group of people so that they can be the best that they can be, but more particularly, they help the CEO and the executive leadership team be the best that they can be.
Sometimes people say to me, I'd be interested in your view on this, that we really need to have a cyber expert on the board. I'm in two minds about that. I like the idea of having that sort of expertise, but I would hate to see a board default to an individual or lean on a particular individual in that circumstance.
No, I think the whole board needs to be in every discussion.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
Interestingly, in our board, we're a little bit different than most organisations. We run our committee structures immediately preceding the board meeting, and all of the directors, even if they're not on the committee, are invited to sit in the committee meetings, and all of the directors do attend. And that means as we move through our committees, then everybody is fully informed by the time we get to the discussion at the board meeting, which often can be a lot shorter because there has been a lot of preparation work where you've had the benefit of engagement with management, often not just the CEO and the CFO, but actually deeply into the organisation for the committee engagement. So this is another important point about the way I think governance is evolving, is each director is responsible for the whole company.
Yes.
And therefore, it isn't possible to think of it in the old, let's break up the work kind of view. They're holistic and everything works together. You know, people and culture works across risk and digital and work winning and all of the other things, business development, safety and sustainability. These things all work together. And so I think the evolution of a board now is the capacity for people to come to that meeting with particular areas of responsibility, but diversity of engagement and skills, and, as I said, a deep understanding of the industry that they are asked to direct for. So we have a digital subcommittee, and the digital subcommittee is designed to look at our future strategy, which is the evolution of our platforms and systems for a digital first future. And so that's a combination of how our CapEx programs are being spent, how our programs are rolling out, how we are spending on cyber, for which cyber, let's call it cyber technology and readiness, is a part. But cyber has to go across people and culture.
Yes, of course.
And when we get to the example that of Ventia's experience, it will be evident why that's so important. Audit and risk. I mean, you've got to have the capacity to measure what it is, the risks that you're taking, and often price them and consider the trade-offs. Safety and sustainability. Cyber is a safety consideration. And so if you isolate it to a particular subset of risk, I think you miss the bigger point. Risk is everywhere. How do your committees work in tandem together in order to assess holistic risk for and on behalf of the shareholders, and indeed the safety of your people, the communities in which you operate. And therefore, then you start to think about where the risk will arise from a particular threat like cyber.
Great segue, because I want to talk about a couple of battle scars that you might carry. Can you share, to the extent you are comfortable to do so, what that experience was like for you as a board director, as someone sort of leading a board during those circumstances?
Totally comfortable to be fully transparent on the experience. I received a call from our organisation when I was in Europe on holidays with my wife. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. Everybody leaves their phone on, don't they? The caller was the acting CEO, because our CEO was on a flight to Europe. So I was already in Europe. He was on a flight to a different geography. And it was a case where suddenly there was a situation. He said, we've been made alert to a risky situation. And I said, how quickly can you convene a board meeting? He said, I've already taken the initiative, and the board meeting is set up for 20 minutes from now.
Right.
So whether I was there or not, the leadership were taking action. They were able to get me. Great. All directors were available. And at what was 4:30 in the morning in Europe for me, we convened a meeting. And the information we received is that we had picked up a threat, a potential access to our systems and networks that could have a magnifying effect on everything that we did. So the questions went along the following lines. Do we think this is a credible threat? We do. And we have enough information to know that we don't know how severe this threat is, but it is quite possible that they have access through the back door some of our systems. So at that point in time, we said, well, what is our moral responsibility? We went straight to a moral question to our clients, and to keep their data and the data that we have on behalf of others safe, because we're a critical infrastructure provider. So our counterparts are many governments, the Defence Department, the big telcos, NBN, etc. I mean, hospitals, we've got a lot. So at that point in time, the question was posed by me on this occasion, which was, what are the consequences if we were to shut down our entire access to all of our systems immediately, given that we had that threat and then we had that very important customer base? And the response was, well, there will be consequences, because our systems bill all of our time. They are our safety systems. They are our work order management and engagement systems with clients. If you shut down access, you shut down access to email. You can't communicate with anybody. And the conversation between the board was, well, the balance of consequences are that the risk is higher if we allow the threat to actually get away from us. We've identified that there's a threat there. We now need to take action. And so universally, under advisement from the management team, we said the thing we need to do now is trust our people and communicate the old-fashioned way. Let everybody know, get on the phone, talk to people, use text, whatever you have to do, activate all our BCPs immediately. But more importantly, trust our people to keep our people safe. Trust that our clients will understand, and trust that our systems and all of the things like billing and those kind of things, we can recover later. But if we let this get away, it will be on everybody's conscience that we made an error when we could have made a more difficult decision.
Dave, just interrupt you for a second. That's got to be one of the more courageous decisions and sure, it will bubble to the board, but there'll be a couple of individuals in management that will be making that recommendation to do that, or making that decision in a very short window.
This was not management's recommendation per se. This was a collective discussion between management and the board, and made as a risk-based decision. The consequences, given our client base and our critical role within Australia's infrastructure, was far more important than us getting into a, prove your point of view. This went straight to a moral question. So it was made at the board, and that decision was made in, I'd say, less than 15 minutes. And at that point in time, that was the instruction, which is cut off access to all of our systems, protect the core. Now, fortunately, we had the architecture to do that. We knew that as a board. But there were other circumstances. Our CIO had arrived that day, brand new CIO, not in the chair before. Our director that I mentioned earlier, the digital director, had only just been appointed, so not fully engaged at that point in time. And we were in a position where we just had to make the best possible decision we could based on the best possible information. There were a number of things that worked very well. The cohesiveness of the board and the management team, the ability to work across border quickly. As soon as the CEO landed, the engagement back was, okay, one of us needs to be back on a plane straight to Australia, which the decision was I would go back from Europe. And then the CEO and I worked together over the coming days until he could get back, and then re-establish in the leadership team. But in the meantime, everything stood up. BCPs were stood up. Crisis management teams were stood up immediately. What was interesting is the reason we even detected this was a very thoughtful employee who was sitting part of our defence organisation in Adelaide, and was turned away from his PC on a call and saw the cursor move without his interaction. He grabbed his phone, took a photo of the cursor moving, and sent it across to our digital team. Now, that action was the first indication that we had that there was something wrong. So then, in the hours that followed that, there was the ability to very quickly get in and say, can we verify that there might have been a penetration risk and where it came from? So we were gathering data dynamically as we went. So that was informing our decisions that, yes, this is a credible threat. So it wasn't like we were guessing. We had it. So I think the ability to trust your people, the cultural element to say something's not right here, most things are going to get picked up out in the field. And we have 35,000 people working across critical infrastructure in Australia and New Zealand. We rely on that cultural element more than anything else to establish where risk is arising in our business. We did very immediate communication to regulatory agencies, the AFP, ASD, Cybersecurity Centre, brilliant interactions with everyone. Here's what we know. We immediately put it on our website. We didn't shy away from let's go through a governance check to decide if this is a continuous disclosure issue or not. We said the whole world has to know. Yes. Our customers have to know. Our people have to know. Our investors have to know. The ASX has to know. Put it on the website. The regulatory authorities have to know. And we committed to updating it as we went through the crisis, even though we did not know where that was going to play out. But there it was. So we weren't distracted, if you like, by playing cat and mouse with third parties at all, because we said everything we know is on the website. As soon as we change it, we will let you know there. And people now know they can trust Ventia when they say that. Yeah. So those are the things that were done well. The challenge of the stress on a few people, and then I would say the long tail to recovery, massive long tail to recovery. We were able to stand up very quickly and verify for people that we had not been, accessed. There's been no data exfiltration. We'd met our regulatory obligations. We'd understood where the source was. It was a third-party managed server that had been opened up for a short period of time and then accessed, but could not penetrate into the core. So these kind of things meant that there were a lot of good underpinning what we faced. But what we would recommend for every board is have a manual copy of everyone you have to call, and everyone can access it, not in your electronic data records, because you might not be able to get to those. And the people who need to know have to be able to call those people and have a personal relationship with them. And we worked out too that we needed to spend some more money. We needed to be further up the maturity curve in terms of DISP and NIST. We needed to ensure that we integrated that cultural training and that BCP just to stay fresh and ready to twice a year, not once a year, and not a theoretical exercise, but a live exercise. So we learned a lot. We learned a lot.
Would it be fair to say culturally at Ventia, because of the nature of your culture, you already had that sort of naturally embedded in your organisation? Is that a fair...
It is. Of course, we've got a lot of people, so and they change. So you still have to keep refreshing this. You can't assume that the culture you have today is going to sustain. You must emphasise that you work as a noble purpose to make infrastructure work for our communities, that everyone in the company has the right to hold up a red flag when there's a safety incident or something anomalous. You've got to instill this across a very diversified workforce. And look, I credit an exceptional CEO and an exceptional leadership team with the capacity to not only instill that confidence, aligned with the board around what we value and what are our values, but actually then to keep it up to date with a changing workforce and a lot of subcontractors. More than half of our workforce is subcontractors. So we are responsible for them. They are our supply chain on that side of the equation. And then we have third-party IT providers. We've got to manage through that supply chain as well. And then you've got to have this customer-facing element, but also regulatory-facing element as well. That's a permanent state of being.
Yeah, this I wouldn't mind touching on the role of management and the board, because there's a crisis that's being run and there's a management team. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you had a much more fluid sort of engagement strategy with management. Decisions might have been made together. There was no bright line necessarily. Is that fair? Because sometimes we spend times helping management teams understand how to effectively interact with a board during a period of time where you're in a crisis.
Well, it goes back to the preconditions. All the directors understood the industry, so they understood where risk arose. They were all deeply experienced individuals. Very good starting point. Management, deeply experienced, competent, great trust between the two. So this trust element flowed through in terms of everything we did. Because, when we got to the decision of what we're going to do, we trusted our people totally to run their projects in the way that we thought were consistent with our values. We had to. There was no systems, no communication. They had to deal with that. So the trust element becomes really important. Now, to the point about what's the line, nobody's sitting there saying, this is a board and management, we, us and them thing. This is everyone in together. And therefore it is more fluid. And the way we handled that in a practical sense is that all directors and all management were informed at the same time about the same information that we had. Then when we got to managing through the discovery phase and therefore into the recovery phase, what we were then starting to do is that different leaders participated. So for the first few days, I participated in the crisis management team, having returned to Europe and from Europe. And then the CEO bridged while I was, on my way back. And then we swapped over while he returned, and then I could move out of the day-to-day. And then I also had one of our directors here in Sydney, in this case, who could step in if I wasn't available. So we always had a director in that early stage available to sit in, but not to run the process, to be consulted, as we did our legal teams, as we did our external cyber experts. It was a consultative process still run by our leadership teams with due process and understanding. Of course, we had encrypted messaging, we had all sorts of things going on in terms of what we'll call the basics. But all of that is the precondition for what was a very dynamic situation about just doing the right thing and understanding what the role of a director is versus management. It isn't jumping in and taking control, far from it. It's respecting everyone's role, but it's being invited to the table, which I credit management with, to be there, to be able to share the value of their leadership experience. And then for us as directors, the person at the table, to share with the directors so that we didn't have the CEO having to brief everybody every 5 minutes, could actually get on with managing the risk.
It must have helped immensely as the situation unfolded and more information slowly came to light. That dynamic must have been critical for the success of your response.
Totally. Totally. And we very quickly established that there had been, through the threat hunting tools and the technology we had, that we knew it was an isolated situation. But at that point in time, we then had to prove it to some very, very erstwhile and capable customers who all want to know, well, you say that, but I want proof. And it's the same 3, 4, 5 people who have to diagnose and then provide the proof. And you can't wear them out. You've got a duty of care to them as individuals too, to make sure they're supplemented. So back to the lessons, we had to work out how we could sequence this in as rapid time as possible to give people maximum assurance. Back to transparency, we said the minute we find something concrete, we will tell people. And we did. this is a contained incident. We know where it is, we know where the threat is. Of course, we then had the long tail of proof.
Of course.
No problem.
Yep.
But at that point in time, everybody knew what we knew. And then we were able to then progressively work through it over the weeks ahead.
You raise a great point about your duty of care to people. I've been involved in so many of these now, David. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's part of my job. And I've seen some companies look after their people very well, and I've seen some not so well. I'm going to take you to a slightly more sensitive space.
Sure.
18 months, 2 years ago, the government of Australia thought it might be a good idea to ban the payment of an extortion demand in these sort of situations. It's growing increasingly complex, that decision. There is an argument that how can a board even fulfill its duties if it hasn't fully considered what happens if we pay and what happens if we don't pay? How do you approach that as a chair of a significant company?
As a director, you must sit there and think about holistically the best interests of all concerned.
Yes.
And you must consider all options.
Yes.
You must consider all options. And as I said earlier, even if the advice is there are going to be consequences, it's a risk-based decision at that point in time. And a mature board will take that into consideration. Now, governments often legislate for very good reason and in response to a particular situation. But legislation, as we know, given the volume of legislation that exists, is not perfect. And it often needs to be amended after the fact. And what I will say is the agencies of government, whether it's the National Cyber Coordination Centre, the AFP, the ASD, ASIO, are incredibly well informed. And by the way, we as a company interact with them all the time now as part of our cyber readiness and more particularly existential threat readiness. And in a way that's a very informed, engaged conversation. We are providing information to them, they to us. So this landscape is evolving, Cam, and it's a very important point to make that you cannot, I think, just look at the rule and say the rule is blanket. No, you must consider holistically all of the consequences. Well, there's a moral decision, which let's prosecute on that. And then there will be, what's your duty as a director?
Exactly.
And then there'll be a set of rules. And okay, let's go back to decision making 101. Make sure you've got people at the table who have the judgment and the capability to actually assess those risks and make decisions.
And one thing we find, and this is a bit of a segue into my next sort of line of discussion, is that you can actually bring a board together or a management team together and confront that decision now. You don't have to wait till the blowtorch is being applied. And it's not, this is the decision tree that'll get us to a payment point. That is not what we're talking about. But these are the considerations, and let's understand as a group that we may have to lean into this ugly decision at some point in time. And are we open to leaning into that? Because you don't want, now experienced, David, to have that discussion for the first time when something is unfolding.
Your advice is sound, and all boards should do that. We do that as a board. What ifs? And broad principles-based approach for most of our decision making makes it easier for us to adhere to a set of frameworks that we can then add value quite quickly, because the dynamism of these situations means you're going to make decisions quickly. So go back to your primacy. What are your values? What are your representations to your people and your customers? What is your, moral responsibility, if you like? Just use those as your frameworks for decision making and be clear on what those are. And then make sure that you've got the right process steps behind it, because after the fact, as you well know, you might have to justify those decisions. So make sure you've got exceptional processes backing it up. Why did you make that decision at that time with the available information? Because it may prove not to be a perfect decision later on. So just go back to documenting and have good processes to back up your decision making and your capability. But it all starts back with a director who understands the risk you're taking, a group of people who can work effectively together as a leadership team and as a board, and a level of trust and culture that underpins all of the above.
You're going to make a great lawyer. Can I talk about the simulation?
Yes.
Because this is really I guess, the segue from, do you lean into a decision like that, and then how do you test? A plan is nothing without planning. Eisenhower, I think, said something to that effect. What makes a great simulation for a board?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of points to make here. Firstly, you must do them,
Yes.
and they must be realistic. And I'm pretty excited about what AI is going to do to create more dynamic training tools that are far more realistic. And we've been talking about this in our organisation for everything we do, because your scenario planning can be very, very specific to the situation and the business that you run. So I'm actually quite optimistic about where the quality of simulation goes. But the first thing is you've got to do it.
Yes.
You've got to have a plan. And even if the plan isn't perfect, that's all right. You can adjust that as you go along. And there has to be this very big focus on culture and trust that underpins that. So simulations have a very important role. We know they're not the be-all and end-all of the game, but they're at the heart of actually people working together. So the best simulations are going to become more realistic, but a really good director will sit there and go, look, it's not a perfect simulation, but I'm in the simulation.
Yes.
I'm not going to criticize the simulation.
No.
I'm actually going to say, all right, let's just work with this and practice it.
Yeah.
And engage with your lawyers and then be assessed. So if I go back to the AICD's excellent 4 principles around, readiness and response to an incident, recovery, and then resilience. Excellent framework. There's a lot of great information out there from many organisations, yours included, but certainly on AICD for the broader board community, that you just go back to readiness, and you've got to keep training. Now, for those of us who believe in being permanently ready, you're always training, you're always getting ready, you're always curious about what could happen, and you're updating for the next situation. And in our case, I'm thinking about, where does disruption come from? Cyber's one element. Physical disruption's another. How would you operate without a comms network? How would you operate without a system? How would you operate if there was food, water, and fuel security at risk? What are boards thinking about on these dimensions? But I think we now need to realistically start to look at those simulations that go well beyond a very contained simulation within the boardroom to where can the existential threat actually damage critical infrastructure in this country.
It's a great point, isn't it? The actual catalyst for that crisis is not irrelevant, but it's largely a sideshow to the ultimate question, which is, how does our business continuity plan stack up? How do we communicate when things like this go down? So maybe one of the great benefits of this focus on cyber is it's forcing us, and at least with a baseline scenario, to contemplate that for the first time. I know the government's worried about it, in a big way. So
totally. And the government have got some exceptionally competent people working on this, and industry have. But once upon a time, government owned all the infrastructure that was critical. They don't today. So there are critical infrastructure partners who are asset owners, and then there is operators. So you've got more and more and more people at the table. So this requires a very mature response in terms of how critical infrastructure will be sustained, but go back to how you'll sustain the safety of your people. We don't know where the threat's going to come from, but it's real. And the good news about the cyber evolution is I think it's got us better prepared. But it's not the end game. I mean, we may have done our first, kiddies triathlon, but there's an Ironman looming. We've still got to get prepared for that.
Exactly.
So we've got to think about continual preparation. And if you're going to be a director, it's not a retirement job. If you're going to be a director, you've got to be at the top of your game in terms of judgment, experience, lean in. You've got to be fit for the task. And if you're not, don't take it on.
I'm going to finish this up with one final question. What makes a great lawyer in a cyber incident response?
I think deep experience in the space is fundamental, right? So you can't come to the table saying, you've got training wheels on at this point. So let's go deep experience. I think a long-established relationship with the firm is helpful, because there does need to be a degree of trust in the personal relationship that exists. It's not totally necessary, but it's important that there's firm values alignment, if you like, on the thing. I think the ability to fit in, to be part of a team, not to lead, but actually to be part of a team, which requires the chair and the chief executive to be very self-aware and involve the lawyer in the right way, which is the responsibility on the person asking the question is to actually ask a good question.
Yes.
If you ask a bad question, you are going to get probably a high quality answer, but it may distract from what has to happen. So I think there has to be that teaming engagement. And also the lawyer needs to have worked alongside, hopefully, the cybersecurity experts that you've got there and the CISOs and the community at large, as your point, very important point. You're interacting, so are we. When we come together and they hear, Cam and David are working on this, it's a very different from who.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay, this is serious. And by the way, they're both on the phone. I better speak to them.
Yeah.
So I think that becomes important in terms of the partnership. And your chief counsel must have a seat at the table to say, hold on, we need to put a pause here. You're being very enthusiastic about this. You're going down a path. I haven't got sufficient information. We need more.
Yeah.
You have to have that kind of a relationship with your general counsel, that they are trusted and respected. It cannot be somebody is the more senior, if you like, or holds the role.
Yes.
That is not leadership. Leadership is engaging the whole team, including the lawyer.
David, I think the biggest compliment we get from these incidents is that you brought a calm to the room. You brought a calm to the room. And some of it has to do with the way in which legal advice is given, but it's often more because we've just done enough of these now to help at least give some clarity around what's important in the first 6, 12, 24, 48 hours. Like I said, regrettably, that's from experience, not from a book or a study.
Yeah.
David, we're going to bring this to an end. Can I just say, first of all, congratulations on a remarkable career, a career that's sort of taken you into different industries, significant leadership roles, and now you're one of our leading directors. You're the first director in our director series for the Cross-Examining Cyber podcast. Can I just say thank you for your service, and thank you for your contribution today.
Well, thank you very much.
All the best.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into Cross-Examining Cyber, a podcast brought to you by Herbert Smith Freehills Kramer. This was the first in our director series, and we continue next time with our cross-examination of Templeman-Jones. Thank you again for your time today, David, and thank you all for listening.